Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 116th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this week, it's National Anti-Bullying Week, and this year's theme is one kind word. However, what do we do when people see something and aren't supportive or kind, when it's walking away? You might argue that, well, doing nothing is better than joining in. But actually, when there is a lot of avoidance, sidestepping and feeling uncomfortable, this contributes to the problem. So what can we do to tackle bystander apathy? To join me to talk about this in further detail is Shamsher Chohan, one of the founding directors at Communities Inc. and someone who's worked with a range of diverse communities experiencing discrimination for over 30 years. She's passionate about tackling inequalities, empowering people, and creating opportunities for people to make better choices. And Shamsher developed the Stand By Me project to tackle bystander apathy in responding to hate crimes and incidents, which are unfortunately increasing across the UK. So Stand By Me goes some way to tackling the barriers people have to helping others when they experience hate and hostility, if people don't know what to do or concerned about their safety. It's also been adapted to tackle prejudice and discrimination in the workplace with a focus on those that witness this rather than those that experience it. This approach has gained much attention and has grown from a pilot project in Nottingham in 2018 to a national rollout across England, Scotland and Wales, supported by Google.org. Through this project, Communities Inc. are offering a free one-day training program at no cost to participants. And if you want to know more, you can check out the show notes. So Shamsher, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I've read out your bio, but I think it'd be really useful for listeners to know a little bit more about yourself and what you do on a day-to-day and your involvement in your organisation.
Well, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of training, either from home, which is online, or we're now starting to do more and more face-to-face training. So at the moment, my diary is just full of training dates. That's what I'm doing at the moment.
I know the feeling. And so how did you become the director of Communities Inc.? What was your journey to doing this work?
No, to be honest with you, I'd worked for a number of large organisations, some government departments as well, and I found myself restricted in what I wanted to do. And eventually I sort of ended up doing some work with a colleague of mine who I'd met years earlier, and we worked really well together. And we thought, do you know what, actually let's actually turn this into something, because we felt we had some original ideas, we had some unique perspectives. So in 2011, we formed Communities Inc.
And it's really interesting you talk about restricted in what you do, because that resonates with me greatly. And I think often for people, Shamsher, who look like us, as South Asian women in the workplace, we are received in a particular way. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I was sort of getting fed up to, the back teeth with people saying the right things, but then not really following that through. For example, I was involved in establishing a BME regional organisation, which was trying to challenge some funding that should have gone to another BME organisation. And there were all sorts of shenanigans at play. And when I actually called out some of this bad behaviour, because I did find out about some bad behaviour going on, instead of people saying, oh, we need to do something about this, instead of other funders saying, we need to do something about this, we need to tackle this, it's not right, that's not how the funding should be used, what I was faced with was a wall of silence. And it was because it was a white organisation that I was challenging. I felt that everybody was standing in defence of that organisation, whereas if it had been a black organisation, everybody would have been jumping on them and saying, you're out of order, you shouldn't be doing this, you're acting unethically. But I've found throughout my career, actually, that when you do call out bad behaviour and it's white people that are doing that behaviour, often they close ranks and they try and just shut you out of it. And you just get this silence. There's just no response. And, I think the feeling normally is, I always felt at the time that people just wanted me to shut up and go away, but I wasn't going to. So it's always interesting when people sort of say that, we want people that are honest, that are ethical in how they approach their work, when really, often they don't. They want someone that's going to support them and cover their back if they get exposed for doing something negative or bad.
I couldn't agree more. I've seen that time and time again as well. And that silence and the fact that people just pretend like it's not happening, and it's deeply unhealthy.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, I try not to think about it too much, but it can be quite upsetting. I mean, I'm a bit of a tough cookie. I remember sort of when I originally started working in Nottingham, there was a senior member, I won't say which organisation. He knew who I was. He'd been involved in several meetings where I was present. And we were at a meeting and I passed him in the corridor. And you know what? He didn't even look at me, let alone acknowledge me and say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" There was just nothing. And to be honest with you, when I reflected on it, I thought to myself, what was all that about? Did he literally he couldn't have not seen me, but why couldn't he just even make eye contact or acknowledge me? And it was interesting because about 2 years later, I ended up in a group of, we were doing a session talking to women, refugee and asylum seekers, talking about their barriers to participating in society. And he was actually there sort of observing the discussion as it was going on. And everybody shared their stories. And eventually somebody said to me, "Well, what about you? You were born here. It must be different for you." And I said, "Well, actually," and I repeated that incident. And I didn't say who it was, but I just said, "Well, actually, these are the sorts of things that happened to me." And I looked over at this man, this white man, and he was sitting in the corner shaking his head. And I thought to myself, I was so angry because I thought, I'm talking about you. And he obviously didn't even recognize that. Now, at some stage, I'll bide my time, but at some stage, I'll create an opportunity to have that conversation with him and just say to him, "Do you remember that conversation we were having with the female refugee and asylum seekers?" And I'm going to be saying to him, that was you I was talking about. And maybe he might be completely gutted, but I just, it baffles me sometimes.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable for people though, isn't it? And so following on from that, on the flip side, what does the term active bystander or upstander mean to you personally and also as Community Inc. and the work that you do?
Well, to me, somebody that helps or acts when other people need help, it's about doing the right thing, and often doing the right thing regardless of the consequences. Now, in most situations, I know that there are people out there that do work in an environment where their lives are at risk and where they are in physical danger. But for most of us, the risk of speaking out, the only risk really is the damage to our ego or us feeling scared. So it's not life-threatening, but obviously to stand out, to be ostracized because you are the one that speaks up, you are the one that says something, does have its consequences. But I think, being an ally, being an upstander is about doing the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Because if you're going to start putting conditions to it, where do you draw those lines?
And I mean, that links to potentially why there's so much apathy that you said people are frightened. It is about doing the right thing despite what the consequences might be. And the consequences can be huge. I think people think, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to get that promotion in public. I'm going to get beaten up as well if there's an incident that people see, or, that's between them. I don't want to get involved. What else do you think is wrapped up in all of this in terms of apathy?
I think, first of all, people's perceptions go to the sort of extreme of, the fear and the danger, when actually intervening doesn't have to be anything that involves that sort of danger or that sort of risk. People often used to sort of say to us when we first started doing work around bystander interventions, when do you call for help and when do you intervene? And I always used to say, well, calling for help is an intervention. So I think part of it is about dispelling that myth that if you're going to intervene, it involves physically going over and tackling the perpetrator. Whereas really, with the messages that we've developed and what we cover in our training, it can just be like a knowing look, showing disapproval non-verbally can still have an impact. Watching somebody conducting their bad behavior, getting into their eye line so that they can see that you're watching them, can sometimes being watched can affect people's behavior. So just watching in itself and being seen to watch can actually de-escalate a situation just in itself. And sometimes it's just about those little things. It's those micro interventions that really make a difference. We spoke to a number of people that were affected by hate and hostility, and we asked them, what would you have wanted other people around you to have done? Now, some of those people said, it would have been nice if somebody had just asked if I was okay. Because not acting is not a neutral behavior. If you don't do anything, if you don't send any signal, even if it's non-verbal, even if it's just paying closer attention to what's going on, what you're effectively doing is siding with the perpetrator. And you're almost saying to them, I'm not offended by your behavior. I'm not upset at it. In fact, you're almost saying that you agree with their behavior. And that's what the message that the victim gets as well, that nobody's stopping anything because they think it's okay and they agree with it.
And it goes back to one of my favourite quotes, "Your silence will not protect you," by Audre Lorde. So you're almost complicit by not doing something.
Absolutely.
And so how do you think we can all build stronger communities by calling out inequalities faced by the most disadvantaged groups? That could be inside the workplace or outside of the workplace.
I think just by creating, those connections, I think we've all sort of, we've in an environment where people have become very insular. They don't really look sort of outwards towards people. They don't make those connections. I think we almost need to sort of go back to some values that probably were more prevalent, a decade or so ago, where people did communicate, people did talk to their neighbours. We always hear the stories about people not speaking to each other on the tube. I think it's just about, making those connections and realising that actually, we've all actually got a lot more in common than what we have that divides us. And that's been a common theme, obviously, over the last couple of years in terms of people working in this field to sort of bring people together. But also, I think we also need to think, if we were in trouble, if we were having a problem, how would we feel if everybody around us didn't do anything? And that's one of the questions that we start most of our training with. We ask people to reflect on a time where they needed help, there were other people around them, and those people didn't help. And then we ask them to think about, what is it that you needed those other people to do? And in itself, that basically is the minute version of the training. You know what it feels like when you need help and you don't get it. You also know what you need other people to do. So, flipping that around, why would you not help somebody else? Because you know how they're likely to be feeling, and you also do know what to do.
That's so powerful, isn't it? Because we can all recall times where we haven't been helped. And just you saying that, for me, it triggers these feelings of shame, embarrassment, wanting to hide away, when actually all I needed to do was for someone to say, I can't help you, or not I can't help you, but for someone to say, it's going to be okay. I am here for you. Maybe take a while to get you the help that you need, but I'm going to stay here with you.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a quote from Albert Einstein that we use, which says, the world is a dangerous place to live. Not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. So it's that, if we don't do anything about bad behavior that's happening around us, we're the ones that are perpetuating and potentially escalating that problem.
There was also a stat you wanted to share about intervention.
Yeah, I mean, it comes from bullying research, interestingly, where if somebody intervenes within 10 seconds of an incident starting, then 50% of the time they can de-escalate or stop that situation. So this is this thing about nipping things in the bud. We all know that if we see something happening and we sort of think, shall I do something? And whilst you're thinking about it, it might be escalating. And the longer you leave it, the harder it becomes to actually intervene or do something. But if you see the beginnings of something and you nip it in the bud, you can often stop it or certainly de-escalate it.
I just think that's such a powerful stat. And I've done work in this area and I've never heard that before. So there you go. I think if you take nothing else away from this podcast, listeners, please remember that and take that away. So workplaces, we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, Shamsher, that people, workplaces love to talk about, do training, and that's great, or talk about allyship. But what can really be done to go beyond training? Because having a training session is great, or having a series, but to really create an active bystander culture and kick this apathy into touch.
You're absolutely right. We've done training with lots of local authorities, NHS trusts, voluntary organisations, even with police forces. And what I always say when we work with an employer, rather than sort of community groups, is this is only one of the things that you need to be looking at. And I say to people on the training that it's all very well, we can give you some of the skills, we can give you some of the confidence, we can give you some of the know-how in terms of what you can do. But if your organizational culture is not going to be receptive to it, if you in the past have had experiences where you've reported bad behavior and nothing's happened, especially maybe if that's been about a manager or somebody in the management team, then actually it doesn't matter how empowered or knowledgeable you are, you're still not going to act because, or you're not going to make it known to the organization because you know from your previous history that they're not going to do anything. So we always emphasize that training is great at an individual level. Hopefully people that come on the training will use it in other areas of their life. So it's not just useful for them in the workplace. But if you want organizational change, just training in itself isn't going to work. You need to have the commitment from the senior leaders. And that means a real commitment, not just a letter or a short video that says we're committed to this. So real change involves a lot more than just training.
Yeah, and there's been the reports, haven't there, about police forces and misogyny and behaviour towards female colleagues. And this had been complained about, and there's still this culture. And I don't want to repeat some of the things that I heard, to be honest, because it was shocking and it was really stomach churning, and yet it's there. And so maybe people are listening to that saying, well, that's an extreme example, but actually, sadly, I don't think it is that extreme. So if an organization says, well, we really want to have a zero tolerance approach, what kinds of things should they be doing?
One of the things that they could be doing is when people do complain, when people do raise issues, is take it seriously. Take it seriously and take action so that everybody else in the organization sees that actually it's worth raising these issues, that the organisation will act. We recently worked with an NHS trust, and there was a new lead on equality and diversity that had just started. And within a week, he was faced with some homophobic comments, very blatant comments. I can't remember the details of it, but it's not something that you would have said openly. The new person raised it with the management team, made a complaint, and within 2 weeks, that person was dismissed. Under, it was gross misconduct, and they were dismissed. Now you've got to set the tone. If we work in organizations where we see bad behavior happening, but we don't see any consequences, then that bad behavior continues, and it continues regardless of whether we report it, regardless of whether we complain or not. But people need to have a reason. They need to have a motivation to raise these issues, and knowing that an organization is going to take it seriously is one of the ways that they can do that.
It's so true, because it's easy, like you said at the beginning, it's easy to say, oh, we have a zero tolerance policy, and then everyone almost guffaws and laughs at that, because people can reel off a list of things around, well, this happened and nothing was done, and this happened and nothing was done. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And what about for new organizations who are thinking, well, you know what, we're starting to build our company and our employee base. How do you start from scratch setting a culture that's really positive about this? So we've got the things that you've explained around, mean what you say. And if someone is dismissed for hate crime, appalling behavior, that is brilliant. It's very rare that I see that happen. But if there's a culture that needs to be created from scratch that can be really positive, so it's much more about the hypothetical, the seed sowing, empathy, what are your thoughts on that as well? How could that be done?
I think if you start off with the right premise, I've been involved in a couple of new organisations recently, and we've talked about sort of the values and the principles that we want the organisation to be guided by. And there's a term that I came across called moral rebels. And that's where I sort of got it's doing the right thing, even if it means going against the social norms and being ostracised. So what we've done is, instead of sort of developing values and principles, we've developed some ground rules for moral rebels. And those, are things that guide the way that the organisation works. So, for example, everyone is entitled to respect and dignity, including those we disagree with. all members are accountable for their actions and should be willing to be scrutinised and provide information for any tasks they take on. So making it really clear at the beginning that, being critical or giving negative feedback is not a negative thing. It's all about improving the organisation. Where disputes arise that threaten the harmony of the organisation's work, informal processes should be the first step in attempting a resolution. Sometimes in large organisations, you either don't do anything or you go down the formal route. And also, members should refrain from behaviour that may be construed as bullying. So sometimes we've had to remind people that although their intention might not have been to harass or bully another individual, the impact of that has been felt as that. And so it's about educating people when they do make mistakes. It's about making them aware so that they can adapt and change their behaviour, which is quite contrary to the cultures that I think we see in most workplaces where people are too scared. People are too scared to have a conversation. They're scared of saying the wrong thing. They're scared they're going to end up in trouble. So I think, you have to start off with a culture where, it's acceptable for everybody to, raise concerns, but raise them in a way that's, that's respectful of different views being around as well.
I love that. I love the term moral rebels. I've never heard of it before. That is brilliant, isn't it? And that whole thing, you're right. You want things to be done informally, adult to adult. Unfortunately, life doesn't work like, at the moment, a lot of organizations don't work like that. And that point you said about it's nothing or punitive, let's go all guns blazing, which makes people quite unwell. Formal processes you have to have a strong stomach for them, don't you?
Absolutely. And it can be quite grueling, and I think, anybody that's made an official complaint about anybody within their organisation and it's not been sort of warmly welcomed as an opportunity to learn and to revise existing sort of processes, it can be really wearing. It can be really wearing, especially when you get that wall of silence, especially when other staff members who aren't even involved in the dispute suddenly start taking sides and, they stop talking to you or stop engaging with you. It can be a pretty unhealthy environment and quite detrimental for your mental health.
And I've seen people become very unwell, and often people become a shell of themselves. And even if the issue is sort of resolved, someone in that exchange leaves. And I think for the reasons you've outlined, taking sides, the little whispers, the weird atmosphere in the tea room, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, I worked for an organisation and I raised some concerns about some behaviour externally to the organisation. My organisation backed me. They were like, yeah, you're right. That shouldn't have been done. We support you. We will raise these issues as well. But a couple of months down the line, there was something that happened internally within the organisation. The response to that was completely different. So whilst they were happy for me to raise issues about other people's behaviour, they certainly didn't want me to raise it about their behaviour. And when I did that, literally sort of, I knew I was going to be out the door. There was about 25 people that worked there, and I was accused of isolating everybody and creating a bad atmosphere. Mm. And I thought, what, one person, me, is isolating everybody else? And just, what you were saying about sort of being ill and the impact that it has. I had my 30th birthday in that organisation. And you know what? I didn't even get a card. I know it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it is. When people do that, when people in workplaces do celebrate birthdays, they get cakes, they get presents. They certainly get a card, if nothing else. I didn't even get a card. So eventually, I only had one option. I had to leave.
And that's the thing. So often you have to draw the line and think, what's best for me? What's best for my mental health and my well-being? And it shouldn't happen that way, but that's the reality. And I can really hear a lot of the things that you're saying. And I also think, Shamsher, when you're a South Asian woman, if you don't fit the stereotype of being, and I don't know whose stereotype this is, because I always joke and say, if you've spent any time in a South Asian family with a lot of women and you're not used to it, you might need a hearing aid afterwards. So this idea of being subservient, you should be flipping lucky you've got this job, can you even write English very well? All these things that are there. And when we start speaking up, people love to put us back in a box.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the jobs that I got, I sort of went to start talking to some other partners, meeting them. And one of them turned around to me and said, do you know what? If your manager had known what you were really like, she wouldn't have taken you on. because she probably took you on because she thought exactly what you were just saying. Someone that was servile, someone that was going to be quiet, someone that was just going to do what they were told to do. This organisation had asked me to be on an interview panel. And when I went back to my manager to say, I've been asked to be on an interview panel, she turned around to me and said, why have they asked you?
Flipping heck.
And I said, and I just sort of looked at her and I thought, she says, well, I'm saying that because normally they ask me because I'm the manager. And in my own head, I was thinking, well, maybe you're not that great, or maybe you're not as good as you think you are. And then she turned around to add insult to injury and said, well, I could only assume they want to make up their diversity quota.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
So the only reason, as far as she was concerned, that I would have been invited onto an interview panel, was just so that they could show some diversity. But this was the manager who, one of the first things she said to me when I told her that I had a meeting with the Race Equality Council that we used to have in those days, she said, oh, good, I'm glad you've got that meeting. I'd like to hear what they've got to say about this now, because they're always complaining we don't have any black people. And I thought, oh, okay. So, yeah, I probably wasn't as, I was still confident and vocal in those days. But now I sort of think, do you know what, just for the sake of those people that don't speak up or can't speak up or don't have the confidence to, I consider it my duty to sort of call out bad behaviour where I see it, and almost sort of set the tone, but also set an example that you can do it, that you can challenge these issues. And if that challenge isn't received in a receptive way, then actually, is this really the sort of organisation you want to be working for?
I think that's absolutely spot on. And, the other thing I wanted to ask you is this, this is full on work. This can be emotionally draining, even though, you know everything inside out, and you've probably heard so many stories that have similar parallels. I don't really think the impact stops affecting us. So as a busy professional and doing the work that you do, how do you look after your own mental health? And would you like to share your top 3 tips with our listeners?
Well, I've got a lovely niece who takes me away into different places in my head. She's 9 years old. She thinks that I'm 9 years old as well, and she treats me like that. So she's a great distraction. I've also got some very good friends that, again, sort of, you're absolutely right. It does sort of take its toll, and it doesn't stop at 9. It doesn't start at 9 and it doesn't end at 5. In fact, to be honest with you, every time I watch the news, my brain is engaging in work mode, because whether it's about conflict, whether it's about crime, whether it's, and right at the moment, we've got a lot of that going on, it's relevant. So it doesn't really stop. So yes, my niece provides a useful distraction. My friends are there to support me, and I like traveling. So whenever I get an opportunity to stop for more than a couple of days, I love sort of just getting in the car and driving away somewhere different and just being in a different environment.
Brilliant. And so thank you so much for sharing all your insights, your wisdom, giving us an insight into how you do your training and your approaches. So I'll include these in the show notes, but if people want to know more about your work, how should they contact you or Communities Inc?
If they go onto our website, we've got 2 websites, communitiesinc.org.uk and also standbyme.uk. So either of those will do. Communities Inc. is our generic website. The standbyme.uk is the main website where our work around bystander interventions is. So if anybody wants to know more about Stand By Me or Stand By Her or Stand By Me Against Racism or Stand By Me Against LGBT hate, all of that information is available.
Thank you so much. And I've also included the links to a YouTube channel that you have, LinkedIn, and I know you've also got a Facebook page, which is great for people maybe who want to access it from a community perspective.
Great. Thank you very much.
And Shamsher, thank you so much. It's been such a joy. Even though we've been talking about a serious topic, it's been such a joy to speak to you and hear your lived experience and your knowledge. And just, we can't thank you enough for being part of the show.
No, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been really good to sort of get the message out to as many people as we can. That's sort of what really makes us tick. And so it's great to have these opportunities. So thank you.
And we'll see you everyone in the next episode. Take care until then.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.